Welcome to the Blender software tutorial. In this session, I want to introduce you to the cycle's render settings. We'll learn how to set up professional rendering settings, achieve fast and high quality renders, and how to eliminate image noise in the rendering section. If you enjoyed my tutorial, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Right. In session 12, we're going to talk about renders and the cycle's render options together. First of all, the demo I'm using today and working with is a ready-made demo from the Blender website. Many of my friends have worked with the same demo and you can download it from the Blender website as well. Let's go together. Let's work on some parts of rendering. Okay guys, first of all, when I zoom in or zoom out with the mouse scroll, you can see that it gets really noisy as it moves. When I merge it a bit, the noise it produces gradually decreases. Actually, here it's sampling your noise. It says now it's at 25, 26. You have to wait until it reaches 100. Now for a simple image, meaning a single image, it's F12. For rendering animation, when we want to set a keyframe, for example, if I've set a keyframe here and want to render the animation, I can use the second option or the shortcut key control F12. A render. If I want to take a general render of all the pages in view, I use render F11 for render animation view. If I want to render an animation view, I use Control F12. We've already talked about these two. Now let's move on to the parts about rendering and how we actually do a render. Alright guys, when we select the cycles option for rendering, there are two sections here. The CPU option, which usually uses your computer's CPU. There's a second option, CPU, then we select compute. In the event that this option is currently disabled for you, you should navigate to the Edit menu, then select Preferences. And within the System section, you can manually configure your specific graphics card settings with whether it's Aftermath or After Effects, which I usually use After Effects. It comes back to this. The system you're working with, whether you're working with two graphics cards or just one, and you've chosen this setting for it. So for you, you can set this as a second option for your computer. Now if I pronounced splash wrong, I apologize again. Now I'll close all of these completely. Let's move on and work on these sections together and understand what they are. Okay, first we'll go over to the render section and then open up SMP Live. When I go ahead and check this specific render option, it actually makes my final render size much lighter and more manageable. What does that mean? If I come and do this? Alright, first things first, let me press Shift and A together to add a brand new mesh object for you. I think I will go ahead and add a standard cube. Okay. Let me do that. Right here you can see that it has successfully created my cube object. Alright. Now if I go ahead and apply a subdivision surface modifier to it, I will set the viewport levels to, let's say, a value of 6 for high detail. Let's go ahead and select it right over here, and then we can specify its exact position. Alright, I hear you, so now I will lower the volume a bit. I'll go to the render section. If I go ahead and check this specific checkbox right here, and actually choose to reduce its subdivision level in this area, it will significantly reduce the computational workload and processing strain for me within the viewport section. However, once we move over to the render section, the software will still perform the final render exactly and precisely based on the existing subdivision settings we had before. So if I uncheck this, it will return to its default format. So I'll delete this. I'll check this box. This action makes the specific part that I am currently viewing appear exactly as it should in its original default state. The viewport takes up less space, while the render shows a higher resolution than itself. When it's deactivated, it means you haven't selected a lower resolution and you're rendering based on your computer's capabilities. Now, if I have a background like in this project and I go to the film option and check the transparent box, it will remove the background from all the areas that aren't in the render. By background, I don't mean this wall in my project. I remove the circle that's placed here so that when I want to render as PNG, I can show my entire image. So that's the film section that you can work with. Alright, so for example, I switch the camera on and then off again. Let me keep my camera on. Okay then, let me just make a few small adjustments to it. Okay, I'll place it here. So moving on, the color management section is exactly where you can set your final output parameters. For instance, if you want it to be in a high quality RAW format. For my workflow, I typically use the standard filmic option right here. And then I manually change its lighting settings to get the look I want. This ensures that the overall color profile remains consistent throughout the entire rendering process. If I want it to be raw, I render it based on raw lighting. If I want it to be standard, I export it based on the standard setting. When you're using this, it determines where, on which, what kind of ground and what color you set. Typically, you would usually set it to the standard mode and then proceed to work with that. Okay, the first factor we use in our rendering is the sampling option. Okay, what is this option used for? Look, if you pay attention, the number for samples is lower and the number for render is higher. Usually, we set sample to 32 and for render, we set it between 256 and 512. Here, the viewport shows my work, and after that, here it shows the output of my work. If you notice, these two numbers have changed again. This is the demo that I downloaded this from the internet. Its output quality is really high. I mean 1225. That's correct, right? It needs to render 1225 samples. And in its viewport, it's set to 100. Normally, it's between 30 and 64 in the viewport, and for rendering, it's usually between 256 and 512. Of course, the higher your render number, the higher the quality of your work will be. Guys, did you notice that some noise has appeared here for you? I waited completely for this noise to go away, but there's still noise here. Alright, let's go to the Denoise section so I can check its box. Here I actually have two denoise options. Let me just add a note here. We have two types of denoise. Denoise is the first place where it removes the noise and displays it in the viewport. You can set it to automatic or to Optix, which uses your graphics card's AI. This one uses your CPU's AI, which is what I usually set it to. If you want to set it to automatic, that's fine too. The next checkbox, Render Denoise, is for removing the noise from your entire image during rendering. Again, it gives you the option to use this or to use the AI of your CPU or graphics card. This is for when it removes all the noise from your image and you no longer have any noise. Alright, that's it for the denoise section. Now let's move on to the next part. Light path. In this section, when you want to generate various light sources and apply different lighting modes to them, or perhaps place your light in the scene and fine-tune its specific parameters and properties. You must keep in mind that the more you increase these numerical values, the significantly longer your final render will take to complete. Of course, you'll get stronger light reflections. The lower the numbers, the less time it takes and the less light reflection you get. So you can adjust the numbers and increase them if you want. The default settings are already perfectly fine, but if you have a particular obsession, you can change this and work on it. This is also for the light reflection section, which you can use and see how it works. Alright, now let's move right along to the specific volume or volumes section. Now, you might be wondering, when exactly is this particular section mostly used in practice? When you have a character and you've used hair with these numbers and settings, you work on the hair or your objects and give a stronger render to your audience, your object or your character. Okay? Now, let's move on to the motion blur section. We typically utilize the motion blur effect whenever we want our specific objects or the sample characters we have carefully created to transition smoothly from a simple cartoonish appearance into a much more realistic and dynamic look that mimics how the human eye perceives fast movement in the real world. That's when we apply motion blur to make it look more realistic, and you can adjust this with the numbers. Carefully work with each of its individual frames and give it a much more realistic and professional look so that you can proudly show that finished result to the entire audience. Well, when you manually go ahead and set the performance option here specifically to CPU mode, you will notice that the performance value usually decreases significantly and is automatically set to a value of 64. When you set it to your graphics card, the numbers in this section, let me bring it up again, title size is set between 256 and 512, which makes your render stronger, and the higher these numbers go, the more it increases the rendering power. So when you want to use this option to utilize your memory, you need to pay attention to whether you're using your graphics card or the CPU that's installed, and we make use of it. Well, one of the primary sections we usually find ourselves using is bake. Actually, the literal meaning of bake is to cook. And when I click on it, it essentially bakes all of my scene's lights. In other words, it meticulously adjusts my complex shadow settings, which means I can work with the entire project much more effectively and smoothly than before. This might be a bit hard to grasp right now, but as you practice and light up a character, you'll understand it better. Later on, I might record a video about a character and lighting settings, and then you'll fully understand. Alright, let's move on to our next topic, which is in the output section. In the format section, this is the size where you set your resolution, which is usually 1920 by 1080, or as we say, 1920 by 1080. Okay? Well, this is the percentage, our render percentage, which means, for example, if you want to do a quick test render, set it to 50%. But when you want to do an actual render test, you set it to 100, or you can even set it to 200%. For example, we set it to 200. That means it renders really well, so whether it's 100 or 200, it works. But when you want to do a test render, definitely set it to 50. There is absolutely no reason at all to use such an excessively high volume that you end up permanently damaging or breaking your computer, or gradually causing serious long-term harm to your graphics card. I'm turning on my camera. Can you see it? The size it created for me is 1920 by 10. Next up, let's take a look at the aspect option, which is a handy tool that allows you to adjust your camera size based on the YZ or XYZ coordinates, and you actually have the flexibility to change these settings yourself whenever you want. I'm pressing Ctrl Z. Whether you resize it here or use this option, it does the same thing. the render region checkbox is for when, if I check it, all the render output I get is just this area and it won't render the other surrounding parts. Look, if I uncheck it, you can see that it renders the areas outside the camera as well. But when I check this, it exactly crops it and the render that it gives. Here it shows me that I can choose to shoot at 24 frames per second, 30 frames, 60 or 240. So if we want to shoot at a realistic frame rate, we use 30 frames for animation. If we want slow motion, then we set it to 60, 120 or up to 240 frames per second in this section. This is also for when you want to set the output render you're going to get. How many images do you want per second? Should it be 30 frames, 60 frames, or actually 120 or 240 frames? Alright, that's it for this part. Now let's move on to our frame range. Here in the animation section, we have a timeline that shows the frames. I start here, I set it to 1000, then to 100. Okay, I set it to 100 frames, meaning it will output 100 images for me. If I set it to 500, it will output 500 images for me. This makes it so that the frame I'm exporting consists of several images. Whatever number I change here, it shows me the ending, and I can have that. Okay? In the time section, meaning this option, there are two choices. This is the time where you can increase or decrease the interval between keyframes. I usually don't use it. Whenever I have a keyframe, I use it by moving the keyframes back and forth and do it that way. I give it. This option is for when you can use two cameras. So it gives you two cameras, but we're not dealing with that right now. The important sections that we usually work with are the output section and the metadata section. First, let's talk about metadata. Metadata is for when you want to see what you're getting in your output. It shows you the data, time, blender, frame, camera, and all the scenes that are checked. You can even check the node option, give it a name like here node, and then I can output from it and render it and show this. This is one of the important sections that you need to consider before. Check this from the render menu. Output is where you specify where your work's result will be shown. When I click on render or render image, once the render is complete, well, then when I go to save, it shows me the output. Guys, do you see? Is it disabled right now? That means, well, the render isn't fully complete yet. Once it's done, the save render option here becomes active for me and I can view my rendered image. But when I want to render an animation, this is where I specify the output location for my render. For example, I can set it to desktop, and actually with the format I've chosen, I can even name the file and save it. Test underline, accept or be signed. When I click it, by default it starts from 0 and 1 and goes up. Once you have finished this step, I can use basically whatever file format I want for the final output. It can be traditional film, a high quality PNG, or even a standard JPEG. But listen guys, if you choose to export your work as a JPEG, even if your creative work already has a solid background, it actually lowers the overall image quality quite a bit. I recommend you export as PNG. Let me mention one thing, when you want to export as PNG, you definitely need to go to your render section. In the film section, check the transparent option and then export as PNG. When you want to export as PNG, there are three options: RGB, which you know, and RGBA, which is RGB plus A, where A stands for alpha. Why do we select the RGB alpha section? Whenever we have an MS specifically within our output section, it causes that particular MS to go underneath everything else, and then the rest of our various outputs are layered directly on top in a specific order. Usually we prefer to set it to the RGB alpha section for the best results. If you want to render your output on this AA, it will definitely give you a high quality output, but it will take more time and can also damage your computer system. You can also select it in the film section. When you select the film, make sure to also adjust your audio settings to specify which part of the audio you want. Maybe you've added audio to your video and have already adjusted it. Personally, most of the time I export as PNG and work with this alpha section. I do it and take the render. Once I've set up my settings and hit start, for example, if I set the start to 100, it means it will take 100 pictures for me. I click on render animation and it exports the animation for me. Well, I hope you enjoyed the cycles tutorial. Please like me, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Until the next tutorial, goodbye.